Ma'am, you're violating HOA Code 14B. The voice ripped through the still morning air like a siren. I froze, shovel in hand, as a tall, stiff man in a pressed polo shirt stormed across my driveway. His clipboard slapped against his palm with each step, sharp and deliberate, like a gavel striking down judgment. That was the first time I ever met Gerald Whitman, the self-proclaimed president of our homeowners association. I had moved into Maple Drive barely 3 weeks earlier, eager to start a quiet, peaceful life after my divorce. My little blue house, with its white shutters and small front garden, felt like a fresh start, my first real home. That morning, I'd been kneeling in the dirt, humming softly as I planted rose bushes by the walkway. The sun was warm, and the smell of fresh soil almost made me forget the chaos of the last year. Then Gerald appeared. His tone wasn't just rude, it was commanding, the kind of voice used by men who mistake control for respect. "You're in violation of HOA landscaping standards," he said, flipping a paper from his clipboard. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his glasses spotless, and his expression utterly without warmth. Grass length, garden placement, and unapproved flora. He said it like he was reading from a sacred text. I blinked at him, confused. "I'm sorry, I didn't know I needed permission to plant roses." He smirked. "Everyone knows the rules. It's your responsibility as a homeowner." He handed me the paper, his signature already stamped across the bottom in bold black ink. Notice of fine. $2,000. $2,000. My stomach dropped. I'd just spent most of my savings on closing costs and paint. I tried to laugh, thinking maybe he was joking. "Sir, there must be a mistake. I just moved in." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "There are no mistakes in this neighborhood, Mrs. Miller. There's compliance, or consequences." His words hit harder than I expected. My hands felt dirty from more than just the soil. Around us, the neighborhood looked almost unnervingly perfect. Identical lawns, evenly spaced mailboxes, every porch flag positioned at the same angle. From behind half-closed blinds, I could see faces peeking out. My cheeks burned with embarrassment. I tried to ask if I could see the specific rule or maybe appeal the fine, but Gerald cut me off. "You can take it up with the board, which, by the way, meets at my house every first Monday." His lips twitched into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I suggest you come prepared." He turned and walked off without another word, leaving me standing there holding a piece of paper that felt heavier than any bill I'd ever received. I looked back at my rose bushes, bright red, defiant, and suddenly out of place in a world ruled by rules. That night, as the wind rattled the windows, I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was some clerical issue. Maybe the HOA's system was just outdated. I'd call them in the morning, but when I stepped outside to grab my evening mail, my heart sank. There it was, another envelope. This one wasn't a copy. It was stamped in red ink. "Final warning, failure to pay will result in legal action." I stood under the porch light, paper trembling in my hands, a knot forming in my stomach. "I thought it was a mistake," I whispered to myself, until I realized the mistake was trusting him. "You don't talk to me like that in my neighborhood," Gerald snapped, his face twisting red as he slammed his porch door inches from my nose. The sound echoed down the street like a gunshot, and for a second, I just stood there, stunned, humiliated, and unsure how a conversation about roses had turned into a power struggle. It had been 2 days since the fine showed up. I'd spent those nights replaying our confrontation in my head, trying to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, there'd been a misunderstanding. I'd even written a polite note asking for clarification and slipped it under his door. That morning, I decided to talk face to face, calm, reasonable, neighborly. That was my mistake. His house sat at the end of Maple Drive, perfectly symmetrical, the kind of home that could have been pulled from a catalog. The hedges looked like they'd been measured with a ruler, and even the welcome mat sat at a perfect 90-degree angle. The air smelled faintly of bleach and cut grass. Sterile. Unnatural. Almost suffocating. When he finally opened the door, Gerald didn't invite me in. He just raised an eyebrow, as if I'd shown up unannounced to an interview I wasn't qualified for. Yes, he asked, his tone clipped. Mr. Whitman, I began carefully. I just wanted to understand the violation notice you gave me. I didn't receive a copy of the HOA rules when I moved in, and he cut me off with a sharp laugh. Every homeowner should know the standards, Mrs. Miller. This community has a reputation to uphold. We don't tolerate disorder. His living room looked like a shrine to himself. The walls were lined with certificates, community leadership, neighborhood excellence, HOA President of the Year. But on closer inspection, most were from online organizations I'd never heard of. I could almost feel his pride radiating from the walls, feeding him like oxygen. I understand, I said, forcing a smile. I'd just like to review the bylaws, maybe attend the next meeting too. The bylaws are not for casual review, he interrupted sharply, stepping closer. Board materials are confidential. I blinked. But I'm a member of the HOA. Shouldn't I have access to? His voice hardened. Mrs. Miller, we run a tight ship here. If every homeowner demanded to see documents, there would be chaos. The board trusts me to enforce order. That's when something inside me shifted, confusion turning into suspicion. He said the board trusts me, but I hadn't heard a single name other than his. No secretary, no treasurer, no vice president. Just him. He saw the doubt in my eyes and sneered slightly. Look, if you can't handle the standards here, maybe this neighborhood isn't the right fit. He took a sip of lemonade from a glass by the window, looking past me like I wasn't even there. I wanted to argue, to stand my ground, but I realized there was no reasoning with someone who enjoyed this kind of control. His power wasn't about lawns or flowers. It was about submission. Legal nugget. Under Georgia Code 44-3231, homeowners have the right to inspect HOA bylaws, meeting minutes, and governing documents. Refusing access isn't just unethical, it's illegal. I turned to leave, my pulse pounding. As I stepped off his porch, I noticed a curtain move from across the street. A woman I didn't know, older, quiet-looking, met my eyes for a split second. She glanced nervously toward Gerald's house and mouthed something I almost didn't catch. Don't ask questions, she whispered. If you like your peace. The words sank into me like ice. Keep your voice down. He's watching, Linda whispered, her eyes darting toward the big bay window at the corner house across the street. Through the glass I could just make out the faint movement of a curtain. Gerald's curtain. It fluttered for a second, then stilled. It was a warm Saturday afternoon when I met Linda Torres, my next-door neighbor. She'd seen the confrontation between me and Gerald earlier that week and invited me over for coffee and company. Her tone had been kind but cautious, like she was offering help with a secret cost. Her living room was small and tidy, filled with the smell of cinnamon candles and something baking. She smiled as she handed me a cup, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion, the kind that comes from years of walking on eggshells. So what did he fine you for? She asked softly, as if the walls might be listening. Roses, I said, shaking my head. Apparently they violate something called Code 14B. Linda let out a bitter laugh. Of course they do. Mine were Halloween decorations. 2 pumpkins. He fined me for holiday clutter. Said they weren't removed within 24 hours of October 31st. I stared at her, stunned. You're kidding. She shook her head slowly. Oh honey, he fines everyone. Some just pay to avoid the drama. Others, move away. Her words lingered in the air. I glanced out the window again. A couple walking their dog crossed to the other side of the street when they saw Gerald's house. A young family 2 doors down didn't even use their front yard anymore. It was as if the entire neighborhood existed under silent supervision. Has anyone ever challenged him? I asked. Linda leaned in closer. That's the thing. There's no one to challenge. No board meetings, no elections. He says the board agrees with his decisions, but no one's ever seen them. That knot of anxiety in my chest twisted tighter, then hardened into anger. I had bought this home for peace and freedom. not to live under a dictator with a clipboard. I sipped my coffee, forcing my voice to stay calm. You've lived here longer than me. Do you think he's even following the law? She shrugged, lowering her voice. Honestly, I don't think there is a law he hasn't bent. People tried filing complaints once. He threatened to raise community dues. After that, everyone just stopped trying. Her words hit me hard. I wasn't just dealing with arrogance. This was a pattern of fear, a culture of silence. Legal nugget. By state law, every HOA must have an elected board of members and maintain public meeting minutes accessible to homeowners. Any HOA run by a single individual is operating outside legal boundaries. I looked at Linda, the first real ally I'd found here. We can't just let him keep doing this, I said quietly. She nodded slowly, her eyes shining with both fear and hope. Then we start small. We find proof. People will listen if you show them something they can't ignore. Outside, Gerald's sprinkler clicked on, the rhythmic sound almost taunting. I stood by the window, staring at that perfect lawn, and made up my mind. I decided to face him again, I said, gripping my phone. But this time I hit record. Are you recording me? Gerald's face turned crimson, his voice cracking through the air like thunder as he jabbed a trembling finger toward my phone. For a split second, I thought he might actually snatch it from my hand. The morning sun glinted off his glasses, and I could see the pulse hammering in his temple. I didn't flinch. I'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in my head. I told myself to stay calm, to keep my tone measured, my expression neutral. The small red light on my phone blinked steadily in my palm, hidden by the folder I pretended to hold. Mr. Whitman, I said evenly, I just came to ask for clarification. Again, the fine, the rules, the meetings, none of this makes sense. You said the board meets regularly, but no one seems to know when. He folded his arms, puffing out his chest. You're out of line, Mrs. Miller. Questioning me in front of others, spreading rumors. That's defamation. Rumors? I asked, feigning innocence. You mean about the board not existing anymore? That hit a nerve. His jaw tightened. The board is confidential, he barked. We don't answer to every nosy neighbor who wants attention. You people think rules don't apply to you. That's why property values drop. I bit my tongue. My plan wasn't to argue. It was to listen, to let him expose himself in his own words. Around us, the hum of lawnmowers filled the air, and I could sense the eyes of curious neighbors behind their blinds. Gerald liked an audience when he was winning. Not today. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. You're making a big mistake challenging me. If you keep this up, I'll fine you again. Non-compliance, insubordination, interference, I can write them up however I want. That last part, I can write them up however I want, sent a chill through me. I kept my gaze steady and said nothing, forcing him to keep talking. He laughed, a dry, smug sound. You think anyone's gonna back you up? Please, the board hasn't even met in... He stopped himself mid-sentence, his lips clamping shut. But it was too late. That half-slip, that moment of careless arrogance, was already sealed in my phone's memory. The confrontation ended with him storming off toward his house, muttering something about legal action. I stood there for a few seconds, letting my heartbeat settle. My hands were trembling, but not from fear, from adrenaline. Later that evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my phone beside it. The hum of cicadas filled the night, steady and low. I hit play. Gerald's voice filled the room, every word clear. The insults, the threats, and that line. The board hasn't even met in... He'd said it casually, but in that moment, he'd admitted what everyone suspected. There was no functioning HOA. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. The fear that had gripped me for weeks began to shift into something sharper. Purpose. Legal nugget. In Georgia, it's legal to record a conversation if at least one party, in this case, me, consents to it. I hadn't broken any laws, but Gerald had just exposed that he'd been enforcing rules without legal authority. I didn't know it yet. But that one sentence would become the thread that unraveled his entire web of control. I didn't realize that one sentence on my recording, I whispered, pressing stop, could bring him down. Inactive corporation? That can't be right. I yelled at my laptop screen, my voice echoing through the quiet of my living room. The words on the Georgia State Corporation website glared back at me in bold red letters. Status: inactive. It had been 2 sleepless nights since my confrontation with Gerald, and that recording kept replaying in my head. The board hasn't even met in... Every time I heard it, I felt my stomach twist tighter. Something inside me whispered that there was more to this. Something much deeper than petty power trips and fines over rose bushes. So I brewed a pot of strong coffee, rolled up my sleeves, and started digging. At first, I didn't even know where to begin. But then I remembered something from my brief stint teaching civics. Every homeowner association is required to register as a non-profit corporation in the state where it operates. That means public records, records that don't lie. I typed Maple Drive Homeowners Association income hours into the state's business search tool, hit enter, and waited. What popped up made my pulse race. Date of incorporation, 2009. Status: inactive, administrative dissolution. No annual filings since 2017. I blinked twice. 2017? That meant for the past 6 years, Gerald had been running an HOA that didn't legally exist. My hand shook slightly as I clicked through the documents. Listed under Board of Directors were 3 names: Gerald Whitman, Treasurer Charles Donahue, and Secretary Carla Myers. I didn't recognize the other 2, so I did what anyone would. I searched them on Facebook. Charles had moved to North Carolina 4 years ago. Carla? She'd sold her home in our subdivision 5 years back and hadn't looked back. I found a post of hers that read, "Glad to be free of HOA politics. Never again." It all began to click. The fake fines, the secrecy, the arrogance. Gerald wasn't protecting community standards. He was using a dead corporation as his personal weapon. I pushed back from my desk and let out a bitter laugh. "So that's your game, Mr. Whitman," I muttered. "You've been acting like a king in a kingdom that doesn't even exist." I spent the next hour printing every document I could find. The inactive status report, the list of former board members, even the archived filing records. My printer whirred endlessly, spitting out page after page of evidence. When the last sheet slid out, I stared at the pile and felt the anger rise in my chest like heat. He'd fined me, humiliated me, threatened legal action, and none of it was even real. I grabbed my phone and called Linda. She picked up on the second ring. "Sarah, everything okay?" "Better than okay," I said, barely containing my excitement. "You're not going to believe this. The HOA, it's not even active. It's legally dissolved." There was silence on the other end, followed by a sharp gasp. "Wait, what? Are you sure?" "Positive. I'm looking at the state records right now. Gerald's been enforcing rules and collecting fines under a non-existent corporation." Linda let out a shaky laugh, half shock, half relief. "So he's been scaring people with nothing?" He's just a fraud." "Exactly." We both sat there for a moment, the weight of it settling in. Months, maybe years like of fear and intimidation, and it all came from one man pretending to be something he wasn't. For the first time since I'd moved here, I felt powerful. Not angry, not afraid, powerful. I gathered the stack of documents, slid them into a manila folder, and opened a new email draft on my laptop. I typed the words slowly, deliberately. Subject: potential HOA legal violation. Urgent inquiry. I attached every file, took a deep breath, and hovered my finger over the mouse. Then I clicked send, to an attorney who could change everything. "This isn't just a violation," said Attorney James Carver, leaning back in his chair, brows furrowed in disbelief. "It's impersonation of authority." His voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen far too many cases like mine. But even he looked stunned. I sat across from him in his downtown office, my manila folder of documents spread open on the desk like evidence in a courtroom drama. Outside, Atlanta traffic buzzed faintly, but inside the room the silence was heavy and deliberate. When I'd first walked into Carver and Associates that morning, I was a bundle of nerves. My palms were slick, my voice shaky. I'd never hired a lawyer in my life. But after discovering the HOA's corporate status was inactive, I knew I needed more than anger. I needed the law on my side. James flipped through the pages I'd printed, occasionally murmuring under his breath. Inactive since 2017, 2 board members moved out of state, fines issued under a non-existent entity. He glanced up at me, eyes sharp behind his glasses. Sarah, none of this is legal. He's been operating without any corporate authority for years. I felt vindicated, but also a little sick. So all those fines, the liens, the threats, void, he said firmly. Every last one of them. If he's collected money from anyone, that's potential fraud. For a moment, I just stared at him. The air in the office felt lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. So, what do we do now? He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hinted at both confidence and quiet outrage. We start by hitting him where it hurts. His fake power. He typed quickly, his fingers flying over the keyboard, drafting a cease and desist letter right in front of me. The tone was surgical, direct, legal, and unflinchingly professional. It demanded that Gerald immediately withdraw all fines, cease communications with homeowners, and provide proof of active corporate status, something we both knew he couldn't do. As the printer hummed, I watched the paper slide out, crisp, official, and powerful. Seeing my name next to his on that letter made my hands tremble with a mixture of relief and anticipation. Send a copy to his address, James instructed, and one to the county records office. Let him know this isn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. I nodded, swallowing hard. Do you think he'll back down? His expression darkened. People like him rarely do at first. They're used to scaring others into silence. But the moment he realizes you're not alone, he'll crack. As I left his office, the late afternoon sun painted the streets gold. For the first time since moving into Maple Drive, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. The kind that makes your chest ache because it's real and fragile all at once. Legal nugget. Under Georgia law, an inactive HOA corporation loses all legal authority to enforce covenants, issue fines, or place liens on properties. Any such actions are invalid and can be challenged in court. Driving home, I rehearsed what I'd say when I saw Gerald again. Maybe I'd even record the next conversation. Maybe I'd finally watch him stumble over his own lies. But that optimism didn't last long. When I pulled into my driveway that night, the first thing I noticed was the deep indentation of tire tracks cutting straight across my lawn. My heart pounded. The mailbox hung open, its door bent backward, papers strewn across the curb. I stepped out slowly, scanning the street, but it was quiet. Too quiet. The air felt heavier than usual, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. I picked up the torn envelopes with shaking hands, a chill running down my spine. He knew I'd gone to someone for help. And now Gerald Whitman wanted me to know. He wasn't going down without a fight. "This is war," Gerald shouted from the middle of the street, his voice booming across the cul-de-sac. Neighbors froze on their lawns, hoses and rakes hanging midair. The sound carried, bouncing off mailboxes and stucco walls, until all of Maple Drive felt like a stage, and I was the villain in his show. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, refusing to give him the reaction he wanted. The cease and desist letter from my lawyer had been delivered 2 days ago. Since then, Gerald had gone from smug to unhinged. He didn't confront me directly at first. He preferred the slow burn of intimidation. It started with complaints. One morning, I found an envelope taped to my door. Notice of trash violation. Bins visible from curb. The next day, another one. Noise complaint. Late night disturbance, 10:07 p.m. Except I hadn't even been home that night. By the end of the week, I'd received 5 separate violations. All unsigned, all clearly from him. My hands shook as I gathered them into a neat pile, trying to keep my composure. But the real humiliation came when I walked outside and saw him standing with two neighbors, waving a paper in the air, saying loud enough for me to hear, "Some people just don't respect the rules around here." That same afternoon, Linda showed up at my door with a Tupperware of cookies and a whisper. "Don't let him get to you," she said softly. "He's done this before. To the Garcias, to the Millers before you. He thinks scaring people keeps him powerful." Her support was a small light in a dark week. She and two other neighbors, people I'd barely spoken to before, started keeping watch, noting dates, times, and any interactions they witnessed. They weren't ready to confront him publicly, but they were done pretending he was harmless. When I told James, my attorney, what was happening, he didn't sound surprised. "That's classic retaliation," he said over the phone. "Document everything. Every letter, every encounter, every witness statement. These people thrive on silence. If you give him noise, paper trails, dates, evidence, he'll fold." So that's what I did. Every new complaint went into a binder. Every strange noise outside my house. Every phone call with no voice on the other end. I wrote it all down. I even installed a small security camera near the porch light. But the tension on Maple Drive was unbearable. The air itself seemed charged with something toxic. People crossed the street to avoid speaking to me, afraid of being seen taking sides. Even the kids stopped riding their bikes near my house. One evening, I caught Gerald standing across the road, arms folded, watching me water my plants. I met his gaze and didn't look away. He smirked, a small, satisfied curl of his lips, and walked off. The message was clear. He still thought he was in control. Legal nugget. Under state law, retaliation by an HOA or its officers can be reported to the Georgia Real Estate Division or local housing board. Harassment, intimidation, or misuse of fines in response to legal action is grounds for disciplinary measures and potential civil penalties. For the first time, I realized this wasn't about roses or bylaws anymore. It was about power, plain and simple. He couldn't find me legally, so he was going to break me psychologically. That night, as I was preparing lesson plans at the kitchen table, my phone buzzed. James's number flashed on the screen. His voice was steady, but his words froze me. "Sarah, he just filed a lien on your property. They put a lien on my home? For flowers?" I whispered, my voice breaking as I stared at the document in my hands. My fingers trembled as if the paper itself carried a charge of electricity. The black ink glared up at me, cold and final. Lien amount, $2,000. Reason, non-compliance with HOA regulations. When James called me that evening, I thought he was exaggerating. He wasn't. "Sarah," he said, "I checked the county records. There's an active lien filed against your property. We need to meet." I drove to his office the next morning with the same sick feeling I'd had the day I opened that first violation letter. Only this time, it was worse. A lien wasn't just a threat. It was a legal claim. It meant if I ever sold my home, that fake debt would follow me. It could destroy my credit. My sense of safety evaporated. James already had the document pulled up on his computer when I arrived. "Take a look," he said, turning the screen toward me. "This is your property record at the county office. And this," he pointed to a section halfway down the page, "is the lien filed by Maple Drive Homeowners Association, Inc." I frowned. "But that's the same name listed as inactive in the state database." He nodded grimly. "Exactly. This filing came from a dissolved entity, which means whoever submitted this document used the name of a non-existent corporation to claim money from you. That's fraud, Sarah, and not the small kind." My chest tightened. "So, he's been filing liens like this for years?" James rubbed his temples. "I don't know yet, but I can tell you this much. He's not just pretending to be a president. He's pretending to be an entire legal organization." We drove to the county records office that afternoon to confirm it in person. The clerk behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses and a calm professional voice, pulled up the filings for Maple Drive. Her brow furrowed as she scrolled. She murmured. "You're not the first one to ask about this HOA." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" She sighed softly, leaning in. We've had 3 other homeowners come in over the past 2 years. Same situation. Liens filed by an inactive entity. We flagged it once, but it looks like whoever's doing it knows how to make it look legitimate. The room felt like it was spinning. Gerald wasn't just harassing me, he'd built an entire system of fake authority and used it to steal from people. James straightened his tie and handed the clerk a business card. "We'll be submitting a formal report to the district attorney's office," he said. "This isn't a civil issue anymore. It's criminal." Legal nugget. Under Georgia law, knowingly filing a false or fraudulent lien is a felony offense. It carries potential prison time, fines, and civil damages for every victim affected. As we left the building, the anger I'd been suppressing for weeks finally boiled over. He's been terrorizing people for years, and no one stopped him, I said. James looked at me, his tone steady. "They will now. But this will get messy before it gets better." Messy didn't even begin to describe it. That night, I sat on my porch staring at the quiet street, every porch light glowing like a silent witness. Somewhere, behind one of those windows, Gerald Whitman was probably smiling. But he didn't know that his empire of fake paperwork had just been exposed. Because the clerk's words echoed in my head long after I got home. "You're not the first person he's tried this on. Mr. Whitman, this is Detective Harris. We need to talk about your HOA accounts." Those were the words that cracked the calm facade of Maple Drive. The sentence spread faster than gossip, whispered from porch to porch, and by the end of the day, everyone knew. Gerald Whitman was officially under investigation. It all started with my statement. A week after the county clerk confirmed the fraudulent lien, James helped me file a complaint with the district attorney's office. They took it seriously, very seriously. Within days, 2 county investigators showed up at my door, notebooks in hand. One of them introduced himself as Detective Harris, a tall man with sharp eyes and the steady calm of someone who'd seen far worse. He asked me to walk him through everything. The fines, the fake letters, the confrontation, the lien. I showed him the documents I'd kept neatly organized in a binder. Color-coded tabs, timestamps, and even video stills from my porch camera. He nodded approvingly. "You did your homework, Ms. Miller. Most people don't keep this level of detail. It's going to help." Over the next week, officers went door to door, speaking with other homeowners. Some were hesitant at first, afraid of getting involved, but when they realized Gerald couldn't legally touch them anymore, the fear started to fade. One by one, they came forward. The Garcias admitted they'd paid a $500 driveway stain fee just to stop the harassment. The Thompsons confessed they'd been charged $200 for unauthorized exterior lighting. Every story sounded the same: fines issued without explanation, cash payments made directly to Gerald, and no receipts. By the end of the month, the investigators had pieced together a pattern. A trail of personal deposits going back several years. Gerald had pocketed thousands of dollars in fees from terrified homeowners, all funneled quietly into his personal account. When Detective Harris told me, I could barely process it. "You're saying he's been stealing from all of us? For years?" "Looks that way," he said. "And it's not just fines. We found utility reimbursements and maintenance checks written out to his name. He's been treating this HOA like his personal bank." I should have felt vindicated, but mostly I felt disgusted. All that time, he'd looked us in the eye, preaching order, compliance, community pride, while bleeding us dry. Still, for the first time, the fear that had once ruled this neighborhood was fading. Neighbors started talking again. People smiled when they passed each other. It was like sunlight breaking through after years of overcast skies. Legal nugget. Under Georgia law, homeowners can petition a court to audit HOA financial records and demand a full accounting of collected dues and expenditures. If fraud or misuse is found, officers can face criminal charges and restitution orders. One afternoon, Linda knocked on my door with tears in her eyes. "They came to talk to me," she said. "I told them everything, the fake warnings, the threats. It felt good to finally say it out loud." That night, I sat in my living room, flipping through my binder of evidence, and realized how far things had come since that first $2,000 fine. Fear had turned into resolve. What started as one woman standing up for herself had become a neighborhood reclaiming its voice. But just when I thought I could finally breathe, my phone rang again. It was James. His tone was calm, but serious. "Sarah," he said, "you're not just a witness anymore." I frowned. "What do you mean?" There was a pause. "You're being subpoenaed to testify. The county wants you in court." "Order in the court!" the judge bellowed, slamming his gavel as Gerald's lawyer tried to shout over my testimony. The sound cracked through the room, commanding silence. My hands trembled slightly on the witness stand, but my voice, steady and certain, didn't waver. For months, I'd lived under Gerald Whitman's threats and lies. But here, under the cold fluorescent lights of the county courthouse, I finally had the truth on my side. The courtroom was packed that morning. Nearly every seat was filled with residents from Maple Drive, many of them people who had once avoided my eye at the mailbox. Now they sat shoulder to shoulder, watching the man who had controlled them for years squirm in a suit that suddenly looked too big for him. James stood at the front table, calm and deliberate as he arranged the stack of evidence we'd compiled. My recordings, the inactive corporate filings, the fraudulent lien, and written statements from over a dozen residents. Gerald sat beside his attorney, his jaw tight, his lips twitching in irritation every time another document was placed before the judge. "Ms. Miller," James said, gesturing toward me, "can you tell the court what prompted you to record Mr. Whitman on that day?" I took a breath, forcing myself to meet Gerald's stare, because he wouldn't stop threatening me. He said he could find me however he wanted. He admitted the board hadn't met in years. James pressed play on my phone's audio file, now part of the court record. Gerald's voice filled the room, arrogant, commanding, and then that fateful line, "The board hasn't even met in," followed by the sound of silence where he realized he'd said too much. The effect was immediate. Gasps rippled through the spectators' benches. Even the judge raised an eyebrow. Gerald's lawyer stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. This recording—" "Overruled," the judge snapped. "The recording is admissible. Continue, counselor." James nodded, then turned back to me. "And, Ms. Miller, after this interaction, what did you discover about the HOA's legal status?" "That it didn't exist," I said clearly. "It was dissolved in 2017. Every fine, every threat, all of it came from a corporation that had no authority." The judge leaned forward, studying Gerald. "Mr. Whitman, is this true?" Gerald opened his mouth, but no words came out. His lawyer whispered something furiously in his ear, but Gerald just sat there, red-faced, glaring at the floor. James handed over the final document, the county's confirmation of the inactive status, and a statement from the clerk confirming multiple fraudulent liens. The silence that followed was heavy, almost reverent. When the judge finally spoke, his tone was cold and deliberate. "This court finds that Mr. Gerald Whitman acted outside his legal capacity, misrepresented authority, and filed fraudulent liens under an inactive entity. Dafalis, fines, fees, and liens issued by the so-called Maple Drive HOA are hereby declared null and void." A murmur swept through the courtroom. The judge continued, "Furthermore, Mr. Whitman will be personally fined, required to reimburse residents, and permanently barred from serving in any HOA or community leadership position within this county." I didn't realize I was holding my breath until it came out in a shaky exhale. Around me, neighbors clapped quietly, some wiping tears from their eyes. Linda squeezed my hand from the front row. "Legal nugget. Always verify your HOA's registration status with the Secretary of State before paying or appealing fines. A legitimate HOA must maintain active corporate filings to enforce any rule." Gerald's lawyer hastily gathered papers as two bailiffs approached. As they escorted him out, I caught a final exchange, the lawyer leaning close, muttering something that made my blood run cold. "There's money missing. Lots of it. All in favor of removing Gerald Whitman permanently, say aye. The room erupted in unison. Aye, echoed from every corner of the Maple Drive Community Center. Dozens of hands rose high into the air. Hands that had once trembled in fear every time a white envelope appeared in their mailboxes. This time, they weren't voting out of fear. They were reclaiming their home. It had been 3 weeks since the court ruling. The dust was finally settling, but the neighborhood was still raw, still waking up from years of quiet submission. Gerald's house sat dark and empty now. Foreclosure notices stacked on the front door, a for sale sign leaning crooked in the grass. But the scars he left behind went deeper than cracked pavement or faded paint. He had turned good neighbors into strangers, and it was going to take time to mend that. That morning, for the first time in 6 years, Maple Drive held an official HOA meeting, this time with county oversight. Folding chairs lined the small community hall, coffee cups on every table, residents murmuring to one another with cautious excitement. The county clerk sat near the front to supervise the reformation process, clipboard in hand, ensuring every rule was followed this time. When the motion to permanently remove Gerald passed unanimously, I felt something inside me release, a knot I'd been carrying since the day he first yelled about HOA Code 14B. Linda leaned over, whispering with a smile, "You did it, Sarah. You really did it." I shook my head, smiling back. We did it. All of us. The meeting continued with nominations for the new board. For a moment, I was content to just sit and watch, but then Linda's hand shot up. "I nominate Sarah Miller," she said boldly. My heart stopped. Heads turned. A few people nodded immediately, and before I could even react, someone called out, "Seconded." The clerk looked at me over her glasses. "Do you accept the nomination, Ms. Miller?" I hesitated, then stood. My voice shook a little, but my words didn't. For too long, this HOA has been a weapon. It's supposed to protect our homes, not threaten them. If you trust me, I'll make sure it never happens again. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was full. The kind of applause that comes from people finally breathing easy again. By the end of the meeting, a new board was elected. 5 members, all volunteers, all determined to rebuild what Gerald had broken. Transparency was the first rule we agreed on. Every bylaw, every meeting minute, every financial record would be accessible to any homeowner who asked. No secrets, no more intimidation. But the biggest shock came when the county auditor presented her findings. She stood at the front with a thin folder in her hands, her expression grim. During our review of the HOA's financial history, we discovered over $20,000 in payments deposited into accounts belonging to Mr. Gerald Whitman personally. We'll be pursuing restitution through the court. A wave of disbelief and anger rippled through the room. People gasped, whispered, even laughed bitterly. One neighbor muttered, "I paid him $400 just to keep my Christmas lights up." I felt tears sting my eyes. Not from sadness this time, but from sheer disbelief that we'd all endured so much. And yet, we'd finally pulled the mask off the man who'd tormented us. After the meeting, I stood outside with Linda, the afternoon sun warm on our faces. Kids were riding bikes again. Dogs barked. For the first time, Maple Drive sounded alive. "It feels different," Linda said quietly. Like the neighborhood finally exhaled. I nodded. Because it did. We were living in fear. Now we're finally free. Legal nugget. Residents always have the right to demand transparent accounting, fair elections, and access to HOA records. If your association hides its finances or meetings, that's not leadership. It's a red flag. That evening, I returned home, my binder of documents finally tucked away in a drawer labeled "closed." I brewed tea, sat by the window, and watched the street I once dreaded living on. For the first time, the silence felt peaceful. But peace didn't last long. As I was shutting down my laptop, a new email notification appeared. The subject line read, "Inquiry. HOA irregularities in Brookside Estates." I opened it, and my jaw dropped. "Dear Ms. Miller," it began, "we've heard about what happened on Maple Drive. We think the same thing might be happening here. Can you help us? I stared at the screen, realizing that maybe my fight wasn't just about one street anymore. Maybe it was just the beginning. $2,000. That's what it cost me to uncover a dictator. That number used to haunt me. I remember standing in my front yard that first morning, holding that fine notice in disbelief, wondering how a man with a clipboard could hold so much power over ordinary people. But now, every time I look at that same paper, folded neatly in a drawer labeled Justice, I smile. Because that fine wasn't the end of my peace. It was the beginning of my fight. I moved to Maple Drive, thinking I was buying a little corner of stability, a chance to rebuild my life after divorce. Instead, I walked straight into a neighborhood ruled by fear. One man pretending to be an entire system. Gerald Whitman believed he could bully, intimidate, and control an entire community just because no one had the courage to question him. But courage doesn't start with confidence. It starts with anger. It starts with a whisper that says, "This isn't right." That whisper became louder every time he sent a letter. Every time I saw a neighbor lower their head. Every time I caught him watching me from across the street. Looking back now, it's strange how quickly fear can turn into fuel. When I discovered that the HOA was inactive, when James confirmed the fraud, when the judge finally ruled him guilty, I realized something powerful. The law doesn't protect silence. It protects those who stand up and speak. The transformation wasn't just legal, it was emotional. I learned what it felt like to go from being a target to being a voice. To see people who once hid behind closed blinds now stand together at meetings, voting, laughing, living again. I watched my street come back to life, not because someone gave us permission, but because we took it back. It's easy to think HOA corruption is rare, that it's just a few bad apples. But I've learned that corruption thrives wherever people stop paying attention. All Gerald did was exploit our trust and our inaction, and he almost got away with it. Legal nugget. Always verify the legal status of any HOA before paying dues, fines, or fees. Demand transparency. Ask for meeting minutes, and keep written records of all communications. These are your rights, not privileges. Now, when I hear someone mention their HOA, I tell them what I wish someone had told me. Don't assume authority means legitimacy. Don't assume silence equals peace. Real order, the kind worth living under, is built on fairness, not fear. I still keep that first fine notice. The red final warning stamp has faded with time, but the lesson behind it is permanent. Every time I see it, I'm reminded that power only works when people surrender theirs. If you're watching this, and you've ever been bullied by a corrupt HOA, a crooked inspector, or any system that made you feel small, remember this: you are not powerless. The law is only as strong as the people willing to use it. Have you fought back against a corrupt HOA? Tell your story below. You never know who needs to hear it. Someone watching right now might be living their own version of Maple Drive, and your story could be the push they need to fight back. As for me, I thought my battle was over. But that email from Brookside Estates proved something different. There are more neighborhoods like mine out there. More people waiting for someone to stand up first. So when I say the $2,000 fine freed me, I mean it. It bought me my voice, my purpose, and my peace. Because the next HOA that tried it picked the wrong neighborhood.